Hello my friends and welcome to this video today. So in today's video I want to talk about 5 things in photography that you can really easily improve on. You could call them mistakes. I don't know if mistakes are a possibility here because photography is a form of art and there are no mistakes in art. However, these are things that I came across over the years in photography that are really easily avoidable and might improve your pictures. So feel free to stick around now and let's go. So you might ask yourself now, who is this guy and why does he want to tell me something about mistakes in photography? And honestly, this is a pretty valid question because let's face it, my photography is not hugely successful by any means. I'm not like a famous landscape photographer, nature photographer whatsoever, but I've been into photography for many years and most of that time it was just for my personal hobby basically. I just took photos, mostly landscape photos, as my personal hobby, as I said. For the better part of 10 years I did this honestly, and only after that I started earning money from photography. And still, I'm sitting here in my 50 square meter apartment and in a neighborhood where you might get stabbed when you leave your door after sunset. So yeah, it's not this bad, but it is not a huge success story at the moment. Maybe it will change someday. However, I came across these things in so many years, and at least for me it took me a couple of years to figure some of this stuff out. And this is the reason why I'm doing this video today, and maybe it will help some of you guys out there. So as I said, feel free to watch this video now and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get started with point number 1. So the first quote-unquote mistake that I want to talk about today is only going out and shooting in perfect lighting conditions. So what are perfect lighting conditions? We all heard about, sunset, sunrise photography, when the sun is really low in the sky and, the light is absolutely beautiful and warm and smooth. And we all heard that it's not worth going out, when it's harsh daylight or when it's raining or foggy or just overcast. And honestly, I believe this is a mistake because you are missing out, and I missed out a lot of things because I always thought, the sky, it doesn't look so promising today, the weather isn't exactly perfect today. And this is the point where you basically have to motivate yourself and go out anyways, because you can adapt to lighting situations. For example, a few years back I went to Muscat, which is the capital of the state of Oman, and it wasn't a guided tour or anything like that, but the way I traveled there was pretty strictly detected basically. So I didn't have much time at the locations there. We visited this one mosque during one of the basically worst situations you can have as a photographer, during the super harsh daylight sun. The sun burned down from the sky nearly overhead, super hard shadows everywhere, but I just couldn't wait until sunset there because we had to go on. And situations like that, they will teach you basically how you still can work with unperfect lighting conditions. Another example would be a visit in the Dolomites last year. I've documented this here on YouTube as well, where the weather was kind of bad for a few days, and I always thought about, should I stay in the hotel now or should I go out anyways? It was overcasted, it was rainy, and it was not really beautiful honestly, but I still went out and got some pretty cool shots, in this case of a waterfall for example, because it doesn't matter for a waterfall if it's overcast or not. Matter of fact, it's maybe even a little bit better when the when the sky is a little bit overcasted, so you don't get this harsh shadows there. And these are situations where you basically just have to adapt and have to learn to not miss out. And even if the photos are not perfect on the first try, I think it's still worth going out and try to take pictures even if the light is bad. So the next thing I want to talk about, the next mistake, is focusing too much on gear. And I think this is the point of this video where most people already heard about it. We all know the phrase, the camera doesn't take the picture, the photographer take the picture. And this is honestly true, but it also leads to false conclusions, I believe, because obviously without a camera you can also take no picture. When it comes to photography gear, for certain applications you will need certain kind of gear. When you want to do a really close-up shot of something, you will need a telephoto lens most likely, at least when the subject is far away. Or when you want to do a really wide angle shot, like the super wide angle shots, you will need a wide angle lens, otherwise it's just technically not possible. So it's not always true to say, don't think about the gear. So what I would recommend is really maximizing the things that you can do with the gear you already have. So what I mean by that is, only buy new stuff when you really hit a limit. For example, when you want to do wildlife photography, you have like, for example, a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, and you realize, I just can't get any closer to the subjects with this lens. For obvious reason, 200 millimeter is not that far when it comes to wildlife photography. And then when you really cannot do anything more with the gear you have, only then think about upgrading your gear. And this is something that I would recommend for basically all kinds of photography. But what you also can think of is not always buying the newest and latest and greatest technology. I know there are tons of great new lenses out there. I just heard that Sony released their new f2 aperture zoom lens series, like for example the 28 to 70 millimeter or the newer 50 to 150 millimeter f2 lens. They are great lenses. Everyone loves these, but they are so expensive. They are way over $3,000 per lens. And when you want to do, for example, landscape photography, you will most likely not need a continuous f2 aperture. You most likely will be happy with an f4 aperture lens as well, because in landscape photography you most of the time close the aperture anyways, like f8. So in this case, you would not really need this lens. I mean, if you have the resources and, if the money isn't so important to you, this is obviously a great choice. Go ahead and buy this. It's amazing. But, most people, they are kind of limited, especially when they are doing photography as a hobby. And then you will have to make compromises, but these compromises, they don't have to compromise the quality of the photos that you take. You will not see a big difference between for example, $1,000 and a $3,500 lens when it comes to landscape photography, for example. It always depends, obviously, on the things you do with the lens. Same goes for cameras as well. You will not see a difference between a 10-year-old Sony full-frame camera and a Sony full-frame camera that was released last week, even though it might be 10 times as expensive, And as I said, it always depends on the situations you use your gear for. So always think about what you really want to do with it and then decide what you really need as your basically next piece of gear. So the next thing I want to talk about is something that I like to call not changing perspective is enough. Because, when you walk around with your camera, it's pretty easy to just put it up to your eye, turn around and just take a few pictures. That's really easy, it's super fast and super basically efficient. But sometimes it can lead to pretty boring compositions in your photos, I believe. And this is something that I did for many, many years. And we all know about, creating composition, creating depth in your pictures. We all heard this before. But how can you do this? When you are outside and you have nothing there except for maybe a building or a beautiful mountain in the background, what can you do? So what I would recommend is always taking a look around you. Maybe lay to the ground, lay down in the dirt, take the dirt as a foreground. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be the most beautiful thing. Just try to change perspectives. You can also try to find some stairs to go up. Some people even bring a ladder, for example, to create some interesting perspectives. And I think this really matters in photos because this eye level height of photography, it is really common because, as I said, it's super easy, super fast, and a lot of people do this, even with their smartphone, for example. So we all are so used to this look of photos, and I do not say this is bad all the time, but in most situations or in a lot of situations, it can be really, really great to, just walk around a little bit, maybe, as I said, lay down and try out different perspectives. So mistake number 4 also has to do with mistake number 3 I just talked about, basically, because I want to talk about the foreground in your pictures. We all think about, the main subject and maybe a background, for example, when you do portrait shootings, that you have a nice blurry and creamy bokeh in the background. We all know about this, we all love this, but we often forget about a foreground in your picture. And I believe a foreground is equally important than the background in your photo because it creates this depth, It really pulls the viewer into your photo, which I believe gives a great effect. And for example, when you think about the foreground, you can do the things I just said. For example, lay down, lay on the ground, take the ground as a foreground. But you can also bring dedicated stuff to create an artificial foreground. For example, you could bring some leaves or stuff like that, something that you can hold in front of your camera lens, which is really, really easy. It is a really easy tool to create basically a beautiful effect and a beautiful foreground, a beautiful blurry foreground in your image. And remember, it doesn't have to be something special in the foreground. So, you don't have to have some beautiful flower there. Sometimes it's just enough to have a bunch of leaves or or some grass on the ground in the foreground, because it just will blur out, but you will see it in the photo and it will give this beautiful effect of depth to your photos. And I think this is something that, you know, you should remember sometimes, not just to create a beautiful background, but also to have an amazing foreground in your photos to get the best pictures possible. So the last thing I want to talk about today is, you know, something that I like to call being afraid to fail because of other photographers out there. And what I mean by that is, when we go through Instagram, for example, we will find absolutely perfect, beautiful photos that are just stunning. And nowadays, some of them might be AI, but this is a different story. But what I want to say with that is, you know, you look through all these beautiful and amazing pictures, maybe from beautiful places all around the world where you always dreamed of being. And this is something that happens to me all the time. I have so many places in the world where I really want to travel, but at the moment it's just not possible, or it would be, you know, too expensive, or I don't have the time or stuff like that. And, you know, I see the photos from other people from these places and I got a little bit discouraged because I cannot get there. And this can be really discouraging for a lot of people, I believe, but it's really not worth thinking about this, honestly. Because, you know, even if your local landscape, for example, and I'm talking about landscape photography here, but I think this goes for a lot of different fields of photography where this effect really kicks in. Nonetheless, I believe you can still create amazing and beautiful pictures, even if they do not like the ones you maybe see on Instagram sometimes, because, you know, it's like always with social media, a lot of this might be fake, but even if they are real, you know, you can get inspired by them, but you should not get discouraged by them. And I know this is not always easy, honestly, but, you know, just try to focus on your photography basically and try to improve your photos. And as I said, you can do great and beautiful pictures wherever you live basically. You know, I live in northern Germany, which isn't well known for having beautiful landscapes. I mean, we have some, you know, pretty nice fields here and there, but you know, this big and stunning mountains or all the stuff around the world, you know, this beautiful ocean and beaches, we don't have them here. But you can still make great pictures, I believe, if you just get creative and make the most of it. And even if you cannot travel to the other part of the world to take the greatest photos, I still believe you can get amazing results. So, you know, just keep going. So that's basically it for today. If you have watched this video this far, thank you so much for tuning in today. And, you know, feel free to leave in the comments if you have something to say about this. If you might have some mistakes or things that you've learned over years and years in photography that might be helpful to others. I'm really interested in this. And if you want to, you can take a look at my channel as well. I have a ton of other videos about photography related topics there. And I've also linked a few of them up here somewhere. And for now, I wish you a great day. I wish you a great week as well, and I hope I see you in next week's video. So see you then maybe, and goodbye.